I have to say, I completely loved this one. Very surreal, engaging, unexpected, and ultimately it did bring me to tears. Such a fantastic one, and I really felt like Jodie took command and felt more like the Doctor than ever before. I was very impressed. Spoiler warning right out of the gate, if you have not seen It Takes You Away, then I highly recommend you leave now and go watch the episode. You really don't want any spoilers for this one. And if you're sticking with me, then hopefully you've seen it, so let's move on with the review. Now, this episode basically has three primary locations. We start off at the cottage in Norway, which is a great opening. There's some really good atmosphere here, as we're not entirely sure what's going on. The very isolated setting of a forest in Norway works wonders for creating tension and just setting a mood for the episode. The Doctor and company encounter a teenage girl in the cottage who happens to be blind, and this is relevant because she is alone in a cottage in the middle of the forest in Norway. I had the impression that we were going to get a bit of a Monster of the Week episode, as we heard strange sounds coming from somewhere in the forest, and not having any idea what the creature looked like really added to the tension of the episode, and I was surprised at how well it worked, you know, until Ryan found out that those noises were coming from speakers placed nearby the cottage. When that first happened, I really didn't know what to make of it. All the tension of the past 15 or so minutes seemed to be gone, and I didn't know what I was left with. But then the story kept moving, and it kept being interesting, and for a bit it almost felt like the story was just moving forward while sacrificing what came before it and not daring to look behind. But ultimately, it turned out okay, and I'll tell you a bit more about that later. So, this episode has some really trippy stuff that messes with me while watching it. The scene when Graham looks in the mirror and doesn't see his reflection is just absolutely fantastic. And from then on, I was beyond hooked. The episode was just able to move at a really good pace and always kept me interested. By the time the Doctor, Yaz, and Graham enter the Antizone, I really had no idea what was going on, and I honestly felt that way for a lot of this episode, probably from a few minutes in all the way up until the last 10 or so minutes. So there was so much of this one that I was just incredibly immersed by, but also had no idea what was going on. But not in a way that I was confused, just in a way where I didn't understand. I didn't see the full picture. The pieces didn't quite fit together, much like the characters felt. So that really worked for me. And the time spent in the Antizone is good. It's interesting and strange and just barely doesn't outstay its welcome. I probably would have spent a little bit less time there, but that's a minor grievance. And when everybody actually gets to the mirror world, that's when the pieces do start fitting together. And everything about this episode starts to work even more because it's starting to make sense, and I'll be honest, I didn't think it was going to pull that off, but it did. Also, I love the detail that everything in the mirror world was flipped like a mirror. It was such a minor detail, and I did not notice it upon first viewing, but it's really neat. So we find Hannah's father and mother in the mirror world, and it is pointed out in the episode, but that is some horrible parenting on the dad's behalf. And of course, we get one of the best parts of the whole episode. When Graham meets Grace, he meets his dead wife. And this is one of the better uses I've seen of a dead character making some sort of a reappearance in a television show, because that's something that does happen a lot, and it does not always work. And I love seeing how he had to deal with meeting someone that he loved so much in his world, and how hard it was for him to leave her. And I really thought that was great, and the way it was handled was beautiful. Although it was pretty obvious when Grace said to leave Ryan that would be the line which tipped Graham off, and it did, but it still really worked. Then, of course, is the scene with the Solitract and the Doctor, which on paper I thought was a good scene. There's this wonderful conversation between the Doctor and the Solitract, where the Solitract wants to be a part of the universe, and the fact is that it can't, and it's this whole universe, and it can't work with our universe. Just the idea that basic things in our universe don't work with the Solitract is really cool, and I find it super interesting. Like, just the idea that you don't die, you don't stay dead when you die. That worked really well for me. It's pretty clear why the Solitract can't be a part of our universe, so I thought that was handled pretty expertly. And my only issue with the scene is the frog, which, again, is a fine idea on paper. There's nothing wrong with it. But in execution, it looked rather ridiculous to me. At first, I thought it was CGI, but then I thought it didn't look fake enough to be CGI, and I actually noticed this weird way that it's moving, like back and forth, which tells me it must have been a practical effect. And it was weird to see the frog's mouth moving like a puppet as Grace's voice talked. I found it really jarring and hard to take seriously, but ultimately I had to look past it to watch the scene, and that was the biggest problem of the episode for me. Afterwards, everybody goes home, and we get an absolutely lovely moment between Ryan and his granddad, Graham, when he calls him granddad. And it's really sweet, and I'll admit, even though I saw it coming, I did shed a tear. And their relationship has made me really grateful for Grace's death, because I didn't feel like it added much of anything to the woman who fell to Earth, but showing how it brought these characters together and how they have dealt with it has just been really good television. And by the way, the Doctor was great in this episode. She was really entertaining. I loved the bit about the Woolly Rebellion, but she took things seriously, she took charge, and it was great to see her have such a commanding presence on screen. The companions worked really well. There was a good balance between everybody. Obviously, Graham had a lot to do, probably the most, and he was fantastic as he always is. And Yaz, I did think had some stuff to do. Again, not as much as I would normally like, but she did do a little bit, and I do like her line about reversing the polarity. That was cool. And Ryan, he did have a bit to do as well. Not as much as Graham. He was there. I would have preferred him and Yaz to have more to do, but I don't know exactly how that would have fit into the episode. So yeah, they were good. And the supporting cast is good. Like, everyone's good in this episode, okay? But I would say the ones that are great are Jodie Whittaker and Bradley Walsh. So one thing that I love about this episode is that it feels really unique. After watching it, I really don't know what to compare it to. I couldn't think of a similar Doctor Who episode, or even anything on television or movies that I've seen. And that's not to say that the idea of a mirror world has never been dealt with, or the idea of a loved one coming back, but not as themselves. These are ideas I have seen before plenty of times, but what makes this one feel unique is exactly how it uses them, and the feel and tone of this episode, and just the general immersion that I got watching this one. It really gave me a unique experience, and I loved it. Overall, I thought that this episode was fantastic. There was a lot of interesting ideas, and it was really bizarre and surreal, and it was just such a roller coaster of an episode. I laughed, I cried, and overall, I left this one satisfied. So I'm going to give It Takes You Away a rating of 9.5 out of 10. So that's going to do it for today, folks, and if you join me hopefully very soon, then I'll be reviewing the finale, the Battle of Ranskorav Kolos, I believe it's pronounced, I'm not entirely sure, and then very shortly I'm going to be reviewing the New Year's Day special Resolution. Haven't seen it, actually not out at the time of recording this. I don't know when this video is dropping though, but yeah, I'm super excited for that to happen, and hopefully you join me for those. I'm sorry these reviews are taking so long, but it's just the way things are going these days. So yeah, I'm not going to waste any more of your time. Thank you for watching, take care, and have a lovely week.